My name is Ruth Carter. I am 62 years old, a widow, and I suppose this story begins on the day my daughter Lauren got married. It was 2:10 in the afternoon when I slipped into the Harbor Ridge Country Club, already late, already out of place. The room sparkled with chandeliers and soft laughter. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing louder in my head than it did in the hall, like a countdown reminding me I was not welcome. I slid into a chair near the back, my presence unnoticed, or maybe ignored. A waiter placed a champagne flute in front of me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I stared at the bubbles rising and breaking against the rim, as if they were mocking the silence that wrapped itself around me. Then came her toast. Lauren raised her glass, smiling, thanking her guests for joining her and for keeping the day free of unnecessary drama. The words landed softly in the room, but inside me they struck like a slap. She didn't have to say my name. I knew. She meant me. I looked down at the untouched champagne, my reflection warped in the glass, and felt the finality of it all. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I rose quietly, heels ticking against the floor one last time. As I walked out into the cool air, I thought of Edward, how his absence had left a hollow space in both our lives. A space Lauren now chose to fill with distance instead of love. That emptiness would follow me home, and it is where the rest of this story begins. When Edward died, it felt as though 40 years of my life collapsed in a single breath. We had built a rhythm together, shared mornings, quiet dinners, the comfort of a presence that needed no words. Suddenly, the house echoed with silence, and every chair at the table looked wrong with only me sitting there. Those first months were a blur of grief. I tried to keep myself moving, though I often caught myself listening for his voice, expecting his footsteps in the hallway. In that hollow space, Lauren seemed to step closer. She called more often, checked in on me, and even stayed the night a few times. I wanted to believe it was love pulling her toward me, filling the emptiness Edward left behind. In the back of my closet, tucked high on a shelf, sat the silver box we had received as a wedding gift all those years ago. Edward used to joke that we'd save it for something truly important. After his death, I couldn't bring myself to open it. It became a symbol of what we once had, sealed and untouchable. I didn't know then that the box would matter again, that it would carry pieces of the truth I would later be forced to face. By 7:30 that evening, I was back home, the house still carrying that echo of Edward's absence. I set my purse down, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and watched the amber light catch in the cut crystal. For weeks, I had avoided the old file box in the study, but something in me had shifted. The sting from Lauren's toast pushed me past hesitation. I carried the box to the table, the cardboard edges frayed from years of neglect. The first papers were ordinary utility bills, insurance statements, medical records. Then came the will. Edward's handwriting, his clear intent, everything left to me. My throat tightened with relief and grief, but tucked behind it was another document, crisp and far newer. An addendum. It named Lauren as power of attorney, effective if I were ever declared incompetent. My stomach knotted. The signature Edwards sat on the line, but the date stopped me cold. It was during the very months Lauren insisted on helping with his appointments, the months when I trusted her to ease the weight of his care. I remembered Dr. Alan Price's steady voice telling me Edward showed no cognitive decline, no hint of confusion, yet here was a paper implying otherwise, neatly slipped into the pile. My pulse quickened. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't kindness. It felt deliberate, calculated. I stared at the page until the words blurred, the whiskey forgotten beside me. That night, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I needed answers, and I couldn't get them alone. It was time to find help, someone who could see beyond family ties and uncover the truth. Ray's office sat above a greasy little diner, the kind of place where the smell of fried onions seeped into everything. I climbed the narrow stairs, clutching the file box like it was both shield and burden. Inside, his space was plain: a metal desk, blinds half drawn, a single lamp throwing light across stacks of folders. I slid the papers toward him. He didn't rush. One by one, he spread them across the desk, his fingers careful, deliberate, the way a man handles evidence. I sat in silence, listening to the hum of the neon sign outside. When he finally spoke, his words carried weight. Lauren hadn't just been sloppy or greedy. She had built layers of legitimacy around every move. Legal language, notarized stamps, timing that almost looked innocent. It was all crafted to stand up under casual scrutiny. The phrase sat heavy in me: layers of legitimacy. My daughter wasn't improvising. She was orchestrating. What I had wanted to believe was family tension now looked like calculated elder fraud. Ray leaned back, his eyes steady. If I wanted the truth proven, I'd need more than suspicion. Forensic accounting, expert testimony, it was going to be a battle. He urged me to start recording every interaction with Lauren, every word, every slip. I walked out of that small office shaken, clutching a cheap digital recorder he pressed into my hand. For the first time, I felt both terrified and oddly fortified. The game had changed, and the next move would be mine. Brasserie Lillian shimmered with polished glass and quiet wealth, waiters gliding between tables with trays of champagne, the clink of silverware, the soft hum of conversations. All of it felt carefully staged. I sat across from Lauren and Ben, my linen napkin folded neatly, my heart pounding louder than the string music drifting through the room. Lauren leaned in, her voice laced with concern, sliding a folder onto the table. Pages fanned out: bank slips, notes, highlighted lines, all crafted to paint me as forgetful, careless, incapable. Her smile was tender, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. Ben shifted in his seat, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. His loyalty pulled in two directions, torn between his sister's smooth certainty and the woman who had raised him. That flicker of doubt in his eyes was the only kindness at the table. I slipped my hand beneath the tablecloth, pressing the small recorder Ray had given me. A faint click, hidden beneath the scrape of cutlery, and everything was captured: the careful tone in Lauren's voice, the subtle digs about protecting me from myself. The sting was sharp, humiliation burned, but beneath it, something colder settled in. She wasn't just playing daughter, she was building a case, laying bricks to wall me off from my own life. I nodded slowly, outwardly calm, agreeing that perhaps I should consider help. But inside, I knew this lunch was no defeat. It was evidence. And as the untouched champagne glass sparkled in the corner of my vision, I promised myself I would not be erased so neatly. The silver box waited at home, and with it, Edward's voice, ready to cut through the lies. The house was silent when I came back from the lunch, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I went straight to the closet, to the back corner, where the silver wedding gift box had sat untouched for months. My hands trembled as I lifted it down, its surface still gleaming faintly, like it had been waiting for me. Inside, beneath a layer of tissue paper, was a small flash drive. My breath caught. I carried it to the desk, slid it into the port, and the screen filled with Edward's face. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were steady. His voice low, deliberate, poured into the room. He spoke of Lauren, of how she had been urging him to sign papers he didn't fully understand. He admitted he felt cornered, afraid she was maneuvering to take control of everything we had built. And then, in a tone that broke me, he said he trusted me to see the truth when the time came. I pressed my palm against the screen, tears blurring his image. It was like he had reached across time, leaving me both comfort and warning. The betrayal cut deeper, knowing he had carried that fear in his last days. But grief gave way to something sharper. The box wasn't just a container of memories, it was evidence. Proof that I wasn't imagining this, that Edward himself had seen the danger. I closed the lid slowly, my hands steadier now. I had Edward's words, his warning, his love. And with that, I had a weapon. Tomorrow, I would take it to the FBI. This was no longer just family, it was law. Walking into the federal building felt like stepping into another world, sterile halls, security checkpoints, the hum of quiet authority. My heart pounded as I clutched the flash drive and the recorder in my purse. I had carried secrets alone for so long. Now I was handing them to strangers in suits. The agent who met me was calm, professional. His tone measured as he led me into a small interview room. I laid the evidence on the table, my hands trembling despite my effort to appear steady. He plugged in the drive first. Edward's voice filled the room, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The agent didn't flinch, didn't offer pity. He simply listened, his eyes narrowing as he took notes. Then came the recording from Brasserie Lillian. Lauren's careful words, my polite replies, Ben's uneasy silence. Again. The agent remained quiet, only asking pointed questions when the playback ended. Dates, details, context. His pen scratched steadily against the page. Finally, he looked up. The words were simple, but they cracked something open inside me. This was enough to open a case. Elder fraud, wire fraud. They would investigate. For the first time in months, I felt less alone. Someone with power saw what I saw. Still, the agent's warning echoed, be cautious. Keep documenting. Don't tip your hand too soon. I walked out lighter, not safe yet, but no longer unprotected. Tonight, the truth would have to reach Ben. That night, the house felt smaller, every wall holding its breath. Ben sat across from me, his shoulders heavy, his eyes searching mine for a truth he wasn't sure he wanted. I hesitated, afraid of breaking what little peace remained. But silence was no longer an option. I told him everything. Edward's video, the way his voice carried fear even as he tried to sound strong. The lunch at Brasserie Lillian, every word carefully staged by Lauren. The flash drive, the recorder, and finally, the FBI agent who said it was enough to open a case. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. Ben's face shifted slowly, confusion, then disbelief, then something closer to grief. He pressed his hand against his mouth, as if trying to hold back the reality that his wife, my daughter, had crossed a line none of us could erase. His silence hurt more than words could. I felt guilt wash over me, dragging him into a storm I never wanted to share. Yet beneath the weight, there was also relief. For the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone. When he finally looked up, there was pain in his eyes, but he didn't turn away. That fragile thread between us held. I knew then the storm was only beginning, And Lauren was not done. I woke one morning to find the first blow had already landed. I logged into my bank account, only to see the cold message access restricted. My savings, my checking, even the modest retirement account I'd built with Edward frozen. It felt as though the floor had dropped out from under me. Then came the letter, crisp and official, bearing the seal of Adult Protective Services. They were reviewing concerns about my ability to manage my affairs. The words stung like an accusation to the outside world. I was suddenly recast as a frail widow slipping into confusion, a woman to be protected from herself. And then the notice that cut deepest, a competency hearing, scheduled in less than a month. To stand before a judge and defend the right to live my own life, that humiliation was Lauren's weapon of choice. I could see her hand in every line. The carefully timed filings, the forged addendum she had slipped into Edward's records, the subtle narrative of forgetfulness she had built with every staged concern, every misleading document. She had taken laws meant to protect vulnerable adults and turned them into shackles around my wrists. I felt rage burn through the shame. My own daughter had painted me as helpless, all so she could seize what Edward and I had built. Yet beneath the fear, a stubborn truth remained. I knew who I was. I was not incompetent. I was not invisible. As I folded the letters and placed them back on the table, I whispered a vow to myself. I would not let Lauren erase me. She might have the system in her pocket, but I had something she could never control: evidence, truth, and the will to fight. The investigations spread like cracks in glass, branching out far beyond me. What began with my frozen accounts and Edward's video turned into something larger. The FBI uncovered bank transfers that stretched into other families, signatures that didn't match, and stories from witnesses who, like me, had been made to doubt their own memories. Piece by piece, a picture of calculated exploitation took shape, and Lauren was at the center. I watched the process from the edges, holding my breath as agents gathered boxes of records and questioned those who once trusted her. Each new detail confirmed what I had feared. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Then came the day I never imagined: my daughter, led out in handcuffs. I saw her polished exterior stripped away in a single moment. The same hands that once held mine in childhood now bound by steel. It felt both like justice and like mourning a living death. Relief coursed through me, knowing I was finally believed. Yet grief followed close behind, heavier than I expected. Justice had begun, but it did not bring peace. Standing there, I realized her arrest was not the end. It was only the doorway to secrets I had not yet faced. Somewhere in the files still hidden lay the darker truth waiting to surface. The day they laid the papers before me, I felt the ground tilt. First came the insurance contract, my name at the top, my death written in fine print as if it were a simple transaction. Lauren had arranged it so cleanly, a payout waiting on the other side of my last breath. But it was the next discovery that hollowed me out completely. A ledger, bound in leather, neat columns written in her hand. Dates, fabricated medical notes, calculations stacked beside words like payout and release. My life, reduced to numbers on a page, measured like inventory. I stared at those entries and felt a coldness seep into me. She had charted not just my finances, but my end timelines and expectations, as if I were an asset to be liquidated. The horror was not in the ink alone, but in what it revealed: deliberate intent. Fraud had turned into something darker, a blueprint for erasure. I could almost hear her voice in the silence, logical, detached, convincing herself this was order, not cruelty. Seeing my own child's handwriting spelling out my death was worse than any courtroom, any frozen account. It was betrayal carved into permanence, and I knew then that the hardest confrontation was still to come. Edward's words carried across the courtroom like a final act of love. On the screen, his recorded testimony played steady, unflinching, recounting how Lauren had pressed him to sign papers he did not understand, how she blurred the line between daughterly concern and calculated control. Hearing his voice in that solemn chamber felt like having him back beside me, if only for a moment. His truth cut through every lie she had spun. Then came the sentencing. I sat still, hands folded tightly, as the judge delivered the words that marked the end of this long unraveling. My daughter, my child who once laughed in my kitchen, who once clung to me in storms, was declared guilty. Handcuffed, she stood not as the lawyer she had trained to be, not as the daughter I once trusted, but as a criminal. I felt relief wash over me, heavy and undeniable, yet grief laced through it, sharp as glass. Justice had spoken, but it had not returned the child I lost. In that silence after the gavel fell, I realized survival is not just about enduring betrayal, it's about choosing to keep living beyond it. My story is one of heartbreak, yes, but also of resilience, of finding strength in the ashes of trust. If you've known betrayal, especially from those closest to you, know this: you are not alone. The truth, no matter how long it hides, has a way of surfacing. And though justice is never without cost, it is still worth seeking. I share my story because I believe others need to hear it. If it moved you, I ask you to like, share, and leave your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation alive for those still fighting, for those still finding their way back to light.